about more than violence. We are waiting to hear from you.
Investigators had learned that one of John Muhammad's friends from the military called the tip line and gave his name, as well as the location of a tree stump that the pair used to shoot at. Police had moved quickly in Washington state, and the bullet fragments found there enabled a federal weapons violation warrant to be issued for John Muhammad. By this time, police have also linked him to the purchase of the Chevy Caprice in New Jersey. They now have his picture, a description of his car, and the identity of his likely accomplice. Conrad Johnson's murder had ended the snipers' terrifying grip on these communities, and 2 days later, Muhammad and Malvo were discovered sleeping in their kill car. An alert citizen at a rest stop off of Interstate 70 saw the blue Chevy Caprice and matched the plate number to the one that had been recently broadcast. Malvo, for a while, had guilt surrounding their capture, as he was supposed to have been the lookout that night, protecting his, quote, dad as he waged his unholy war. The day after their arrest, it was announced that both John Allen Muhammad and 17-year-old Lee Boyd Malvo were to be charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder in Montgomery County, Maryland. Muhammad would face the death penalty there, and other charges soon followed. When John Muhammad was asked by police why he did it, his response was, quote, "It was Mildred's fault." Millie Muhammad found out from the ATF that she was the actual intended target of the snipers on October 23, 2002. In 2009, she wrote a book entitled Scared Silent and is a domestic violence advocate. For their crimes in Virginia, Malvo and Muhammad were charged with capital murder, for which, at the time, life without parole or the death penalty were the only sentences possible, even for Malvo as a juvenile. In late 2003, Muhammad was convicted on 3 charges and sentenced to death in Virginia for Dean Meyer's murder outside the Sunoco station. When Malvo went to trial in Chesapeake, Virginia, his attorneys attempted to present an insanity defense. Over 40 witnesses were called to provide mitigating testimony regarding his childhood circumstances, its effect on his development, and their assertion that Lee Malvo had been indoctrinated and brainwashed by John Muhammad. One of Muhammad's sons from his first marriage, plus his first wife, testified for the defense at Malvo's trial in an effort to prove it. Neither had testified at Muhammad's trial the month before. His son Lindbergh described that visit when he was a child, when Millie had to make Muhammad return her stepson to his mother. He said his father had successfully convinced him that his mother had abused him, and that it took months for her to decode that programming from his brain once she got him back. That summer 10 years before had been the only time they'd ever spent together as father and son. A few summers later, just months before the D.C. area shootings began, Malvo had apparently written a letter described as a cry for help, addressed to a teenage niece of Muhammad's first wife. He seemed despondent and asked for help in getting out of, quote, the situation he was in. Muhammad's first wife testified that family members then met to discuss the disturbing contents of the letter, though ultimately they failed to intervene in the relationship between Malvo and Muhammad. Lindbergh said that although Muhammad had barely been in his life prior to the sniper shootings, he knew him as manipulative and as someone who would take advantage of your weaknesses. On Muhammad's execution day, he was there, spending 2 hours speaking to the man he knew as his father, but whom he didn't know as a man. He called it his final opportunity to connect. The jury rejected the premise, and Lee Boyd Malvo was found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder for the shooting death of FBI analyst Linda Franklin. But when it came to sentencing, they did have mercy on Lee Malvo, forgoing the death penalty, and sentencing him to life without parole in March of 2004. He took a plea deal later that year for shooting and killing Kenneth Bridges, and for the shooting of Carolyn Sewell, and was again sentenced to life without parole in October of 2004. When it came time for Muhammad to stand trial in Maryland, he represented himself, and Malvo testified against him as part of his plea deal with Montgomery County in October of 2006. The teen continued to maintain that they were fighting some kind of holy war, and together with 140 children Muhammad would select, a new society would be born, explaining the $10 million demand. 5 months later, Lee Malvo confessed to and pleaded guilty to all of Montgomery County, Maryland sniper shootings, 6 in total. He was sentenced to life without parole for those murders in November 2006. John Muhammad was executed by lethal injection on November 10, 2009, at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He never showed any remorse, but Muhammad did leave his family a letter with explicit instructions that it be released to the public after his death. At first, his family agreed, however, after reading it, the decision was made to keep the contents to themselves. He had been made eligible for execution by the passage of a post-9/11 law designed to make those who masterminded a crime but didn't physically carry it out eligible for the death penalty. The anti-terrorism bill had been created to try and ensure Osama bin Laden be eligible to receive the death penalty should he ever be brought to trial. Following the execution, Malvo penned a letter to John Guida, the man he had shot in the neck in Louisiana prior to the onslaught around the nation's capital. It read, quote, "Mr. Guida, I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you and your loved ones. I was relieved to hear that you suffered no paralyzing injuries and that you are alive. Sincerely, Lee Boyd Malvo." In June of 2013, Malvo's attorneys petitioned both the Maryland and Virginia federal courts to vacate his life without parole sentences, alleging they violated his Eighth Amendment rights. They were rejected a year later and then appealed in July of 2014. By that time, Miller had been decided at the Supreme Court, ruling life without parole unconstitutional for juveniles, except within the rarest of cases. And within a few years, Montgomery made that decision retroactive. It was now applicable to young Lee Boyd Malvo. Over the course of 2017 and 2018, 6 of Malvo's 10 life without parole sentences were overturned or thrown out by federal judges based on the Supreme Court decisions, and his cases were sent back to their respective counties for resentencing. In March of 2009, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear arguments regarding whether a juvenile's youth should be considered if sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and specifically, did the judge in Malvo's Virginia cases take his age into consideration when sentencing him. In October of 2019, the justices began hearing arguments in Randall Mathena, warden of Red Onion State Prison, versus Malvo. Their opinion was set to be delivered in the spring of 2020. However, on February 24, 2020, it was announced that the High Court was dismissing the case. Virginia Governor Ralph Northam signed into law House Bill 35, effective July 1, 2020, which made individuals convicted of crimes as juveniles eligible for parole after serving 20 years of their sentence. Juvenile justice reform advocates celebrated the win, although the amount of juvenile offenders to be paroled remains to be seen. The state has a history of denying the vast majority of parole applicants. However, proponents see the law's passage as a step in the right direction. 22 of the country's 50 states, plus Washington, D.C., already had some type of similar laws in effect. Lee Boyd Malvo himself is unlikely to ever receive parole, as he received multiple life sentences in several jurisdictions. He is currently 35 years old and is incarcerated at Red Onion State Prison, a supermax facility located in Pound, Virginia, notorious for their heavy-handed use of solitary confinement. On March 6, 2020, Lee got married, with one of his mentors telling the Associated Press that, quote, over the past 17 years, he has grown despite his conditions of confinement. He has grown into an adult and has found love with a wonderful young lady. It was a beautiful ceremony. His wife is reportedly the social activist granddaughter of a wealthy real estate developer from Iowa. According to attorney Craig S. Cooley, Lee's wife began writing and visiting him about 3 years before and is, quote, a very impressive lady, educated. Her eyes are wide open. Just about 3 years after John Allen Muhammad was executed in 2009, a now grown Lee Boyd Malvo spoke to Matt Lauer on the Today Show. It was on October 24, 2012, the 10th anniversary of Malvo and Muhammad's capture, that the phone interview took place from prison, during which he made a shocking revelation for the first time in public.
Earlier on, around the age of 6, I was 5 years old, I would say. I was sexually abused by babysitter. And then later on by relatives when I was 8, 9 years old. And then for the entire period when I was almost 15 until I got arrested, I was sexually abused by John Muhammad.
Malvo assured Matt Lauer that he expected nothing by announcing this information and was fairly certain his sentence would never change, regardless of what he said or future legislation. To the family members of his victims as well as to the survivors, he said,
please do not allow my actions and the actions of Muhammad to hold you hostage and continue to victimize you for the rest of your life. If you give those images and thoughts that power, it will continue to inflict that suffering over and over and over and over and over again. You do not give me or him that much power.